I call Rua Bond.
On behalf of New Zealand First to speak to the Shop Trading Hours Amendment Bill. Mr Chair, New Zealand First continues to oppose the Minister's supplementary order paper because fundamentally the complexity of this bill will still remain the same, the cost to local councils will still remain the same, the tinkering and confusion that will come about under the sections relating to employment will still remain the same, Mr Chair. New Zealand First has multiple issues with Part 1 of this bill, and I want to talk to Section 5. So what we want to know is, what New Zealand First wants to know, Mr Chair, is how will this bill ensure that local councils are not financially burdened by this poorly constructed bill that proposes to change from a bylaw setting instrument to a policy setting instrument? We propose that the costs to local councils, unfortunately, will still remain the same. Throughout the Select Committee process, Mr Chair, we heard from Local Government New Zealand and local councils that came in and spoke about the immense concern relative to the cost that this would force on the ratepayers inside of their communities, Mr Chair, and that in itself was quite contentious for them. So what we are actually thinking about too, Mr Chair, is the impact on our local community. And I want to bring to the attention of the Minister, and I'm quite sure he's aware of it at the moment, that there is a Local Government Act Amendment 2, number 2, sitting within the Local Government Select Committee. Now, this proposes to councils that they should amalgamate services that dares to suggest that local councils do not know how to remain fiscally sound and fiscally responsible. And yet, Mr Chair, I ask that Minister and that national-led government, how will this bill propose to go forward that is going to lump on local councils from anywhere being $20,000 to $80,000, whether this is a bylaw instrument or a local policy instrument, Mr Chair? Now, New Zealand First feels that there is actually a better solution for the national-led government, and that is to give our local territorial authorities the ability to give local communities the choice on whether in their district or in parts of their district that their shops can open on Easter Sunday trading. So that, of course, would be to actually hold a local referendum. So truly, before the cost, Mr Hudson, before the cost hits the ratepayers, let's be responsible. Hold a local referendum before it gets to that point. The last local referendum was held on the fluoride in New Zealand, and that was under $14,000. Yet that government expects local councils to spend between $20,000 and $80,000. How is that responsible? That's what New Zealand First asked. The responsibility, Mr Hudson, would be actually to hold a local referendum. The next issue that we have, that New Zealand First have, is actually under new section 5H, G, 5I, 5J, 5JA, 5K and 5L. Now what those sections actually cover under this bill, Part 1 in Section 2, is relatively surrounding the employment opportunities of employees, and this bill proposes that employees will in fact have protection. Well, I beg to differ. As a former employee and employer, this area of this bill has got no sense whatsoever to be put into place within our businesses. And I wonder why the Minister and the National-led Party actually didn't recognise the issues of fishhooks, the absolute ignorance and arrogance that these clauses will put into our local businesses around this country. And I'll tell you why, because what this bill proposes will in fact do the exact opposite. The exact opposite. Now, the Minister has stated that employers and employers must renegotiate annually their availability to work on Easter Sunday. However, this provision inside of this clause cannot actually be put into the employment contract. This bill is complex, it's confusing, and it's going to fail to actually go forward with the intent of this area. And the penalty, Mr Chair, will be on the employee and the employer. I brought up in the second reading an issue that the Minister has not addressed, and that's the fact that you are on a job-seeking benefit and you are under the care, I guess, of the WIN services and a manager. Now, if you go through the process of applying for a job, because you have to be seen to be actively seeking work, Mr Chair, and this clause is the one thing that hinders on you being able to accept that employment, Mr Chair, then that actually has unintended consequences to the job seeker. That has to go back to work and income. Mr Chair, Sorry, I thought you were going to pull the buzzer on me. That has to go back to Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair. The job seekers are actually, they must have set out that they are actively seeking employment. And this is where this bill becomes unstuck on the job seekers. They have to go back and tell their WINS manager that they are unable to take the job due to the fact that they could, and I use this as an example, have to go away to a family unveiling on Easter weekend, because that is when New Zealanders go and do family events just like this one. Now, they run the risk of having their benefit taken away from them, because that will be seen as not actively seeking employment. So this bill fails job seekers. It fails the protection to current employees, that they must take it on board that each year they have to annually review whether or not they are available to work, and that employee is then expected to work with the employer, and the employer, under good faith as employment contracts are negotiated, are meant to have no opinion, no frustration if this is their star employee, to actually be able to and eligible to work on Easter Sunday. So that puts pressure on them, and the only way that that employee can actually get justification they not be treated and mistreated in the businesses. As a former business owner, I know that that does happen. I know that happens, Mr. Chair, and that's why these clauses in this bill are not fit for purpose. I want to say too, Mr. Chair, that the fact that the employees have to go through a personal grievance process, I don't know what background the Minister came from before he came to this House, but clearly the Minister has no idea how devastating this can be for an employee, a workplace and a family, and that is a fact, Mr. Chair. Now, you know, I've discussed about the fact that this is meant to be an area that's meant to protect employees, and I can certainly say, Mr. Chair, that this is not the case at all. New Zealand First absolutely will be opposing this bill. Thank you.
I'm calling Brett Hudson.